Hey everyone, Austin Schneider here. Welcome to Rise Podcast, where we talk about real influence, self-development, and entrepreneurship. What an absolute honor, because I was able to sit down and chat with someone who has significantly impacted myself, my family, and millions of others as well, Dr. Caroline Leaf. Dr. Caroline Leaf has spent the last 30 years researching the mind-brain connection, nature of mental health, and formation of memory. She was actually one of the first people in her field to study how the brain can change directed mind input. 30 years of clinical practice, she has helped hundreds and thousands of people learn how to use their mind to detox and grow their brain to succeed in every area of their lives. In this episode, we talk about our thoughts, cleaning up our mental mess, and how society these days has misconstrued what mental health actually looks like. This is an amazing conversation that I hope you can catch and run with. Check it out. And if you like the interview, I would just ask one thing. You share it with someone that you think would benefit from it. I started this podcast so that I can help get inspiring messages out and allow people to see their potential in unlocking in themselves to rise up in their personal and professional lives. And if it's not being shared, it's not fulfilling its purpose. Hello, everybody, and welcome to another episode of Rise Podcast. I am super honored personally because we have the renowned Dr. Caroline Leaf here, and we are going to talk about all things mindset, all things cleaning up your mental mess, all things emotion. I am so stoked for the next 45 minutes or so that we have together. Dr. Caroline Leaf, thank you so much for joining.
Oh, thank you, Austin. It's great to be with you. It's a good discussion we're going to have. I'm excited.
Yes, good. And firstly, I don't know, maybe there's people here who haven't heard about you or haven't listened to any of your content. If people are unfamiliar, can you just give a quick rundown of what you've been up to the past 30 plus years?
Absolutely. Well, I'm a cognitive neuroscientist, and you could even call me a clinical neuroscientist and a communication pathologist. And I've been in the field for 38 years now. And alongside practicing, I've done 38 years of clinical research. So from day one, I dived into research because I was very disillusioned by I had a fantastic the combination of degrees I did were amazing, but I was still very disillusioned by the fact that back in the 80s, they didn't believe the brain could change. Now then people understood right from about the mid 90s, they understood that, but it was disillusioning to be told as a clinician that, oh, by the way, when your patient's brains are damaged, they can't change, just teach them to compensate. And that just challenged me to look at this thing differently and then I sort of started seeing that people are looking at brain and mind incorrectly. We need to get a better understanding of, what is the mind and what is the brain and what is the body? What do those three do together? What is psychoneurobiology? Psycho meaning mind, and the neuro meaning brain, and biology. And so I set out on a very long journey of trying to understand that, and did very almost untraditional type of research alongside my normal random controlled trials. But I did a lot of, like in my master's and PhD, I did work with different schools and organizations and with people with traumatic brain injuries and learning disabilities. And I had a practice for 25 years looking at working with people with Alzheimer's, dementias, autism, learning disabilities, extreme trauma, war trauma, sexual trauma, all kinds of trauma. And then I had the privilege of working in South Africa. That's where I was born, in Zimbabwe. I grew up in South Africa. But I had the privilege of spending almost 25 years working in the broken system that had been in place in our country. And it's a worldwide problem, but the apartheid system, the whole racist system. So I worked in schools and communities in the apartheid era, the transition, when Mandela came into power, and in the post-apartheid era. And I was doing all of that till I came to this country. And I literally went underground when I say underground, I went underground in these areas 3 days a week just to try and understand the impact of chronic stress on people, because they lived under such chronic stress. The conditions were horrific, as we all know. Racism is terrible everywhere. And I worked on the emotional side, and I also worked on the educational side, because you can't separate those. We have to give people knowledge in order for them to be able to develop in society. But I learned so much in those days of just working with people that had everything stripped from them. And at the same time, I had a practice where I worked with the privileged who could afford to come to therapy. And I worked in fancy schools that had everything, and then going to these areas that had nothing, and then worked with corporates that had everything. And so, it was really interesting seeing it from all the different perspectives. So it taught me so much about the resilience of humanity and the importance of understanding our minds and how big of a role our minds play. And it's not just some philosophical concept, what body's consciousness that we all love to sort of throw out there and philosophize about. Your mind is so important. It's your aliveness. If you're dead, your mind's not working. So your brain, you're not controlled by your brain. You're not controlled by your body. Your brain and body are controlled by your mind. So if we don't start focusing on mind and the relationship between mind, brain, and body, we're missing a huge part of the story. And you just have to look at the past 40 years, and we've become so focused on a biomedical model of everything's about the physical and everything. If you have a feeling, I mean, you and I were discussing this before we started, how you didn't even realize you had feelings because of toxic masculinity and our ridiculous culture of sort of trying to suppress feelings as though they're illnesses. I watched this over the last 40 years. I watched us go in the early 80s from actually accepting emotions, thinking the brain couldn't change, so there was good and bad, to seeing how that the brain could change. I did some of the first neuroplasticity research in my field in the late 80s, showing that the brain could change as a result of mind input. But going from that to where we learned about brain, and suddenly everyone was excited, oh, the brain can change, and then everything became about the brain, and our humanity got removed. And then everything became about, with back in the 80s, about productivity and the more you can do and the individual, and if you're not succeeding, it's your fault. And so neoliberalism took over, and with Reagan and with Thatcher, and so we had global policies that affected us, that have affected the whole psychiatric movement, which is a disaster and has just created more problems. So we entered the pandemic with major issues with mental health being mismanaged and people dying younger than they should. So, I mean, I've been involved in this whole thing and doing research to try and counter this and work against it and give people tools to manage in it. So it's a lot I've said there, but you can unpack it in whichever way you'd like.
No, so good. And I want to just honor your work, because what you're doing is changing lives. I've seen the fruit of your work change my life and the way I think about things, the way that knowing that I can just if I control my mind, I can really control my life.
Exactly.
And even in your book, I mean, you break it down so practically, cleaning up your mental mess, which I read very quickly because it was so phenomenal.
Thank you.
And what I really want people to hear and people to understand is really the why behind starting with your mind, cleaning up your mental mess. I think you had some just crazy statistics in there. The antidepressant world is just going through the roof, but depression is rising as well. Suicide, one in every 4 seconds, a suicide happens.
That's crazy.
There's just so many things dealing, and then we add on social media, we add on comparison, we add on so many toxic just things in our environment that are causing us to really have stinking thinking.
Exactly.
Can you allude to maybe why it's so important to think about our thoughts and to control our mind? And then secondly, what is a mental mess? And do we all have one?
Okay, so maybe we should start with that question first, because I think it'll make more sense. So let's start with the great comments that you've made and summary that you've made there as well. Basically, I talk about the fact that every single human we're all a mess. And that's okay. It's very normal. And that's what we're not told. And from the beginning of time, whenever that was, humans have battled with life, because as humans, we have this phenomenal, incredible ability to think and feel and choose. And we don't always do it very well. And most of the time, pretty much all the time, it's an experiment. And sometimes it's hit and miss. And then, and when I say experimenting, we in the experiences of life, and good and bad stuff happens because other people are making bad decisions and good decisions. So we can't separate ourselves from the environment and from other people. And if we look at that holistically and recognize that it's about us in the world and us experiencing the world, then we can understand that it's totally normal to have a mess, because everyone's kind of experimenting and trying to just cope with life. And then we have people that have really gone down a bad road for whatever reason, whatever exposure they've had, maybe to terrible circumstances, and their decisions are impacting other people by, with abuse and bullying and rape and sexual trauma, and then wars and bad decisions by politicians. And, we just have everything around us is a result of humans making decisions that they haven't really managed very well. So life is incredibly messy, and it is actually okay, because we are designed to actually deal quite well with that. We cope fairly well with a mental mess if we manage it. So what I've tried to introduce in the concepts I teach is that we really got to stop beating ourselves up about actually feeling messy, and recognize that's part of being a human. It's part of this experimental nature that we have, but the big thing is that we need to know how to manage it. And that's what's not discussed sufficiently in schools, in life, and in medical schools and that kind of thing. We have got to teach people about mind from day one in kindergarten. We've got to be teaching kids, this is how you function as a human. This is what an emotion is. This is how, if you feel sad, that's okay. This is what you do. This is what it means. And we wouldn't be sitting this side of, as in adults, we wouldn't be sitting with the issues. I mean, I just released a podcast today of the fact that 1 in 12 children are suffering from extreme anxiety and depression, not as a mental illness, because it's not a mental illness, it's a symptom of something, but it's extreme, so they're not coping, and it's going unnoticed by adults, leaders, teachers, pediatricians. So they're growing into adulthood with mismanaged minds, with toxic issues that are in the brain, mind, brain, and body from toxic, and they don't know what to do with that. And, that's affecting their ability to function as adults. It's affecting their health. And this is increasing, as you said, all the statistics. So we see a rise in mental health. We haven't seen an improvement in the past 40 years with the change in philosophy to make everything about the brain and make everything about an illness diagnosis. The whole psychiatric model, the biomedical model has not helped. It's made things worse. So prior to the pandemic, we already had a frightening statistic that people are dying 8 to 25 years younger than they should. And the 25-year bracket is people with a mental health diagnosis. So people are already dying younger. But if you have a mental health diagnosis, you can almost literally tack on another 20 or chop off another 20 years of your life. So what we're doing is not working. You can't go and take adverse experiences that people have that cause people to feel broken, and that then your body will manifest a warning signal of depression and anxiety, saying depression and anxiety is not an illness, it's a warning signal. It's saying to you, hey, wake up. I'm a messenger. I'm telling you there's something that you need to process. There's something, you can't change what's happened to you, but you've got to manage what's in you. You've got to manage the mess that's in you. And so to manage that mess, we get these warning signals. So if you look at it like that versus, oh, you've got depression, you've got clinical depression, you can't get out of bed, you've got a disease, you're a broken brain. We've made it about the individual. If you're not productive, if you can't function, if you don't fit into these nice little norms, there's something wrong with you as an individual. There's nothing wrong with you as an individual. There's so much wrong with society, and there's so much, and what's happened is that you have had life happen to you, so you're broken, so you're responding in the only way you can and to cope, and it's not sustainable. It's not effective to be aggressive or to bully or to be constantly depressed, or that's a manifestation. It's not a place that you can stay. So what we've got to do is you've got to get people to recognize the warning signals and help them to become thought detectives and unpack and move backwards to find out the root causes, and then to reconstruct that, because you can't take it away, but you can reconstruct it. You can change how it impacts your future. So that's what cleaning up the mental mess is. It is an acceptance of being messy, an acceptance of I'm experimenting. I don't know what's going to happen after this podcast, nor do you. Something may happen that may make you so irritated that you respond in a very toxic way. And that's messy. It's experimental. Now, that's not going to kill you. That's not going to wipe you out. But if you stay in that state, you're going to feel worse and worse and worse. So what you can do is that you can recognize the mess, own the mess, accept the mess, and say, okay, this irritated me. I responded in the wrong way. Why did I do that? And how can I reconstruct that? That's managing the mental mess. And that's what we're not teaching people to do. And that's what I'm trying to teach people to do with my work, and that I have been doing for all these years, is teaching people to accept the mess and understand what a feeling is, understand what a thought is, and what can you do about it. So, I mean, that's the mental mess side. But from there, we can dive into the thoughts and mind, brain stuff.
I think one thing, just to kind of echo that. So what you're saying is that if we have mental messes, what you're seeing a lot of people do is maybe suppress the feelings.
Absolutely.
Not admit it, not take ownership of it. And then what it allows them to do is allows them to be a victim. And then it compounds into really just a downward spiral.
Totally, mentally and physically.
And I think I'm a product of that in many ways, where, what I did with my feelings, with my thoughts, was I was just like, nope, I don't feel that. That's not a negative feeling. I'm going to suppress it. I'm going to suppress it. And then it just got worse and worse and worse. And it's almost like you're piling up a bunch of garbage, and it's just
absolutely
over time, it's
great
just
description.
going to get harder and harder. And you're just burying thoughts that need to be addressed, not actually thrown to the side.
Exactly. And you've explained it perfectly. And on a scientific level, that's exactly what's happening. So what we need to understand is what the mind and the brain actually are doing, and what a thought is, and what is a feeling. I mean, do we really understand what a feeling is? What is a thought? What is a memory? What is the mind? What is the brain? All those words are kind of thrown together as one big jumbled mess, and we don't quite know what to do with them. And we've got this 40-year unfortunate, and it's actually been a bit longer, but we've got this unfortunate, toxic masculinity, toxic positivity, religious damage, so much damage in the religious thing. Can't talk about anything negative, that's negative. Meanwhile, you're suppressing and making it worse. So we've got to completely relook at everything. It's a complete reconceptualization of the process, and this is pretty much how it works. So if you look at yourself physically, for those of you that are just listening, just look at yourself, and inside your brain, in your skull, you have a brain. So I'm actually holding up a brain in a skull at the moment. Okay, it's not a real one. Sometimes people ask me, is that real? No, it's not real. And essentially that brain is not who you are. The messaging that we have been giving, not we, because I'm not part of that scientific group, but that the message that's very dominant in the media is that your brain controls you, and that if there's something that if you have any kind of toxic emotion, there's something wrong with your brain, and therefore you're broken. So your identity and value is challenged, and that in itself is enough to make someone want to commit suicide. Because if you have that cumulatively, if I don't feel valued as a person, Austin, if you don't feel that you're contributing and that you're valued by your girlfriend, by your family, by your people that you care about, your employees, you're going to feel terrible about yourself. You're going to feel that people constantly break you down. You're going to feel that your value is gone. So what we have to start off with is an understanding that you are not your brain. Your mind and your brain are separate, but they are inseparable. They're separate, but they're inseparable. You are you, and you are your mind. And your mind is this unique thinking, feeling, choosing thing that you can only do. So there's something you can do that no one else can do. So your mind is wrapped up in your identity and the ability of you as a person to uniquely process the world in the way you do and produce what only you can produce. So if we start from that point of view, there's all the science behind that. Some scientists have called it that we're literally wired for love. We're wired with an optimism bias. So at our core, we're not these evil people that are drawn towards negativity. We are phenomenal. We are incredible human beings. Even the worst murderer has got this at their core. But when someone manifests with terrible behaviors, there's always a reason. Something has happened that has blocked that core of that person, and that's become damaged, and then they are manifesting in a toxic way. So that's the kind of start point. Then think of what is your mind, what is your brain? Your brain is this thing in your skull, and your body's the brain and body is your physical. That's about 1 to 10% of who you are as a human. If you're dead, the difference between you and I having this conversation and a dead person is our mind. Because a dead person doesn't have anything going on in their brain. We can put all kinds of technology on their brain and body, but nothing's going to respond because they're dead. And eventually the brain and body will disintegrate. But you and I are alive. And if we put all this technology connected to our head and all the different beautiful technology there is to see what's going on in your body and brain, we are going to see lots of action. And that is mind in action. So the technology is picking up this life force, this aliveness, this ability that we have to think, feel, and choose, which is processing the events and experiences of life, the good and the bad. And that's this experimental, messy thing that I spoke about in the earlier part. So mind on a psychological level is our thinking, feeling, choosing, aliveness. And we each do it uniquely. So I don't think, feel, and choose the same way that you think, feel, and choose. And that's great because it means that there's no competition between us. There's only enhancement. But for the last 50, 60 years, we've been in a world that rewards competition. Meanwhile, it's destroying us it's destroying us as humanity. What we have is enhancement. Because if I recognize you can do something that I can't do, there's no threat. I can't compete with you. All I can do is enhance you and learn from you and lift you up. And in lifting you up, I lift myself up. But that's not what we taught. That's not the environment we're in. Okay. So immediately we're in environments that are challenging to the brain, mind, body connection. So our mind is trying to process through this competitive world that we live in. Then we have all the experiences of life that are the result of other people's choices that we're experiencing as we open our eyes in the morning till the time we go to sleep. So our mind psychologically is thinking, feeling, and choosing about what's happening during COVID and the pandemic and social media and your business and life. It's all being grabbed by the mind, and you're thinking, feeling, and choosing at 400 billion actions per second. And that generates the physical nature of the mind, which is this gravitational field, these electromagnetic light forces, work that Einstein already did back in the 1920s. And that, what you see from the scientists' work, is that we are surrounded by a field, an energetic field, which is nothing weird. It's the same stuff that makes your Zoom work and your phone work. It's the same kind of energy.
Yeah, Wi-Fi.
It's just exactly, it's Wi-Fi. We have our own unique Wi-Fi around us, and that's what's keeping us alive. So someone's dead, they don't have that. So when someone dies, they actually weigh less because that mind goes. Okay.
Wow.
So it is it's really interesting. So it's that mind, that's this force that psychologically we experience as think, feel, choose. So as you're listening to me now, and as everyone is listening to me now and watching whatever they're listening or watching, this discussion is an experience, and I'm saying lots of stuff, and you're asking me questions. All of this is sound waves and electromagnetic light waves, and your mind's taking this and thinking, feeling, and choosing this whole big thing, and it's kind of messy, and it's going into your brain, and your brain is responding electromagnetically and chemically and genetically, and a product is being made, a physical product is being made of this conversation, and it looks like a tree, and it's in three places. It's in your mind as this kind of wavy thing. It's in your brain as a physical tree. So I'm holding up a little tree now. That's a little tree in a pot, and it's got roots and branches, and it's in your body. The cells, oops, I just nearly knocked something over there. It's in the cells of your brain and your body, and we have 37 to 100 trillion cells in our brain and our body. So it's in your cells of your brain and your body as a change in your DNA. So everything you're learning from me now and me discussing is going in your mind as a wave, in your brain as a tree, and in your DNA as a change in your DNA. Now that's phenomenal. That's a psycho-neurobiological link. And the way you're processing it is unique to you. So the roots of the tree are what I'm saying, and our discussion, that's what everyone's getting. And that's kind of similar because it's the source. But the branches are how you uniquely hear what I'm saying. So in other words, you're not hearing me the same as the other listeners. The way you're thinking and feeling and choosing about what I'm saying is your unique interpretation, your unique take on the world. So your branches will look different to every single other person's branch. And every branch is made of lots and lots of proteins, and every protein is vibrating with the data that I am giving you. And as I'm giving you the data, you're thinking and feeling and making choices about it. So feeling is an emotion, and every bit of data has a feeling and an emotion attached to it. So I'm generating potentially excitement in you, or feelings of understanding, or feelings of hope, or so feelings are beautiful things. They're adding this beautiful quality and dimension and character to the nature of the data that I'm giving you. So I'm giving you words, but your feelings are making them this unique experience, and that's also built into the tree. So the data are vibrating, the emotions are vibrating, there's chemicals involved here, and in fact we call the chemicals are very often what we would call the chemicals of emotion. There's been a lot of research done on that. So the data is vibrating proteins, the emotions are the chemicals in this tree, and each piece of information I'm giving you gets more branches growing. So by the end of this conversation, there'll be about 2,000 roots, which is what I say, and about 2,000 of your interpretations of what I'm saying. Now, so that is a thought with all this data and feelings are the memories. So memories have got data and emotions in them. And one thought has got thousands of memories, and every thought has a source and an interpretation. And it's a real physical thing, and it looks like a tree in the brain. It's a change in your DNA, in your cells. So it has this wavy structure inside your mind. Now, no one teaches us this. This is why we feel it in our body. This is why it's a holistic experience. This is why when you try and suppress something, so now there I showed a healthy tree. Now for the listeners, I'm holding up a toxic tree. And so now I've got this wiry toxic tree that I use to represent this. So there's the root system and there are the branches. So now this is toxic. So this could be the abuse, the bullying, the things going on at work that are toxic, the experiences of COVID, the isolation, the financial loss, the grief. So all the experiences are there, and there's the interpretation of. So if this was an abuse, the interpretation happens at exactly the same time as the abuse. So then very often, for example, the easiest to explain this is to explain sexual abuse. There's always shame associated with sexual abuse, even though the person is a victim. They always feel like they deserved it and that they're ashamed of themselves. So that's their interpretation of a toxic event, but the interpretation's as distorted as the source. And that then it builds up, and if it's not managed, that's very messy. It affects the physical body because it's in the brain and the mind. In the brain, it looks like this. In the mind, it's the way it's going to be a toxic wave. And in the body, it's going to be a mutation on the DNA. So now I'm keeping my body, making my body with all these mutations, down to the level of telomeres, which are the ends of chromosomes, which influence the cells being made. And we make about 1 million cells every second, which then make up all the organs of our body. So if I keep this and suppress this and don't deal with this and process it and reconceptualize it, I can't make it go away, but I can redesign it. If I don't and I keep it, my entire immune system and my entire hormone system, my endocrine system, my telomeres on my DNA, everything are becoming weaker and weaker and more vulnerable to disease. So accumulatively over time, my body will increase in its vulnerability to disease, which is why when we don't have stuff dealt with, we get an increase in physical illnesses over time. I mean, it's not a situation of abuse and you now have cancer. It's not quite that quick, but if you don't deal with your stuff, you could potentially get whatever, immune, autoimmune, whatever. So it's just an accumulation of stuff. So that's why you can't suppress the stuff, because these are volcanic in nature. They don't go away. They will explode at some point in your life. You can try for years to suppress them, but they will explode at some point. And you can't just be aware. I mean, mindfulness and meditation and all these techniques that are out there that are fantastic only prepare the brain. They only make you aware. But if you stop there, you'll be worse. So if you become aware and you push it back down, you'll actually get worse. You have to go through the very painful, long process in cycles of 63 days of using the signals of depression and your body and your perspective, etc., to actually be aware of all these things and to break this down. As soon as you're aware of something, the branches become weakened. But you have to go through the embrace, process, and reconceptualize. It's deconstruct and reconstruct, and that process. That's how you rewire the brain, and that's what we're not being taught to do. It's not. It's not okay in this day and age for a male leader of a business to say, "Hey, I feel depressed," and that's wrong, because you should, as a leader. Only 3% of leaders are talking about their mental health. Every single person, if you're alive, you're battling with mental health. No one is the exception, and it accumulates. And some of us, I always talk about a bell, and I'll stop after this, and you can unpack with questions. But I always talk about a number line, and think of a ruler or a number line. It starts with 0, and it goes to 10 on one side, and it goes to -10 on the other side. And this will kind of make sense now as I explain this. Imagine a bell curve going from the -4 to the +4. What that represents is are us managing our messiness of life. So life is all this messiness that we've described. And in any one day, you'll get a good email, a bad email, a good conversation, a bad conversation, a good thing. It's all up and down. And some days it's more positive and then it kind of balances out. So on average, if we're having a sort of kind of average life, things are moving between -4 and +4. However, in the last 40 years, because we've taken so much mind management out of the picture and we're not allowing people to express their narratives, there's so much suppression. So a lot of people are living in the -1, 2, 3, 4 for too long, and it's accumulating. So it's shifting then beyond the sort of safe area into the area that's not so safe, which is -5 to -10. And that's when we get extreme states. And none of those states are brain illnesses. All those states are warning signals. So the more depressed and clinically depressed and suicidal we get, those are all symptoms of they're not like cancer. They are telling you, hey, wake up, Austin, there's something going on in your life. You need to process it. So it's our body and our mind screaming at us to pay attention. And that's where we've got to come in and support each other and do the mind management work individually and as a global society.
Fantastic. You are so articulate at explaining such a complex thing. Like I was daydreaming. I was into it. I could see it. I could see the pictures. What I really heard you saying was we all have feelings, whether we think we do or we think we don't. We all have issues that probably have arose through feelings. And it's important to address it because they're not going to go away. They're not going to disappear until you start dealing with it. No. So let's talk about dealing with the mental mess and cleaning up your mental mess. And what I actually wanted to do was I wanted you to maybe give an example, a very practical example of if my mental mess, and it doesn't have to be trauma, like what you say in the book, like, you address trauma, you address many different situations, but maybe if my mental mess was negativity and anxiety, how could I practically use your steps, which everybody listening to this or watching this should go buy your book and process it and actually take the 63 step. Sabrina, my girlfriend's going through it right now and she's loving it. And actually do the 5 steps. So if my mental mess was anxiety and constant negativity or lack of optimism, whatever you want to call it, how could I take what you're saying to clean up, to process it, to really start to transform that?
Okay, so first of all, there's no quick fix. Okay, so when we talk about 5 steps, it doesn't mean you're going to do these 5 steps and you're fine. What it does is these 5 steps are they're not a technique. You can use any techniques within them. You can use anything you have been doing. If you've ever been for therapy or if you've ever read, there's so much available on the internet now. It's different techniques and things. You can use any of those, any form of CBT, whatever, within that, but none of those are going to work unless your mind is driving your brain in the correct direction. Otherwise, you're going to get stuck and you're just going to be going around the mountain all the time and just not moving forward. So it's no quick fix. Also, the big part of it is that I've spent 38 years researching the mind-brain-body connection. So these 5 steps came out of a desperation to help my traumatic brain injured patients and my Alzheimer's patients and my kids with learning and adults with learning disabilities and traumas, to help them to rebuild their brain using their mind in the correct way. So to drive the neuroplasticity of the brain. So to get the messy mind under control, which implies if we can get our messy mind under control, it implies that there's another level to us, and that level is wisdom. So I talk about the wise mind and the messy mind. And the wise mind is a natural part of our wired for love nature. It's the survival instinct in us. It's the optimism bias. It's the part of us that is our natural design that I went back to the beginning about identity and stuff. If you, an example of this, we're having a very wise discussion at the moment. We're processing through quite heavy stuff. That's a wise mind in operation. There's nothing messy about this discussion. It's an intense discussion. If someone came to you in your business and asked you for some business advice, you would give some really good wisdom. That's your wise mind. So every human has the wise mind. We don't use it enough though. And if we get so caught up in busyness and anxiety, et cetera, and the busyness of life and shaped by social media and caught up in the philosophies of the world and competition, we kind of lose sight of our wisdom and we just kind of bumble along in a very messy way, and that accumulates. Okay, so that's the one thing. So the way to use the 5 steps is in very organized cycles of 63 days, because I've researched the 5 steps, which is the mind, what you do with your wise mind, with your mess, to get the messy mind uncluttered and unmessy. And in that process, you're changing what you fire through the brain. You're changing the electrical, magnetic, etc. energy. So you're basically deconstructing, pulling apart these toxic trees, taking the energy away and rebuilding them into healthy trees. And so I'm holding up toxic versus the green tree for those of you that are listening. And so that process I've researched for a long time. And I know that people think that we can change a habit in 21 days because that's been all over the place. But it's a total myth. It's not even accurate. It was proposed in the 60s by a surgeon, and it was never meant, it wasn't a fact. So unfortunately, there's very little research on how long it takes to build a habit. There's really only a few people that have studied it. And my research is one of those areas that I studied. I wanted to see, looking at just pure mind management, how long it would take to change a behavior. And a behavior will change based on a habit. So habits mean behavior change. Why do you want to build a habit? You want a new behavior. Why do you want to change a habit? Because you want to change a behavior. So something that's impacting you. And that doesn't take 21 days. Something does happen in 21 days. A major reconstruction process happens if you're doing it properly. But it won't be what you build within 21 days is not going to be strong enough to impact your behavior. So you'll get to the point where you'll know what you're supposed to be doing, but you won't be doing it because you haven't done the 63 days. You've got to do it in 63 days, give or take. If you 64, 65, it's in that region of 9 weeks. So what we see is that the mind-brain connection to drive neuroplasticity, to create changes in your behaviors and patterns and habits, behaviors, is going to take cycles of 63 days. The first 21 days is where you're doing a lot of intensive work for around 15 to 45 minutes a day to find this toxic thought, literally capture it, recognize, and I'm going to tell you how to do this, and deconstruct it and reconstruct it into something that is super healthy. But at 21 days, this will more or less happen. But this thing is tiny. It's got very little energy. So what we have to do is kind of grow it like a plant. We have to give it water every day and grow it to a point. And that takes another 42 days. And that only takes you 1 to 7 minutes for another 42 days. So it's not, in other words, you're spending 21 days working for 15 to 45 minutes. Very specific. You don't go too long because it's too emotionally draining, and then that's going to affect you.
Sure.
Then you work for another 42 days for only 1 to 7 minutes. And then you're working those cycles. Because if you're dealing with like a massive trauma, you're not going to heal it in one cycle. What will happen is you'll find part of it that your reconstruct part, then you'll recognize, okay, I need to go and do more work and more. I've had some patients that have taken 2 years to sort of finally get a trauma under control and progress.
Wow.
To a point where they feel that they've got a handle on it. But each time there's more and more progress. So there's no cookie cutter recipe for how many cycles you should do. What I'm just doing is providing the science of mind-directed neuroplasticity, which is in cycles of 6. And I'm emphasizing this because people get to day 4, and if they don't know anything about what I'm saying, people are pretty good at getting through the first 4 to 5 days, and then they kind of crash.
Sure.
7 days is another key mark, 21, 14, 21, 42. So there's different periods, markers. So what I've done in my book and I have an app called the Neurocycle app, where I literally give you therapy, whereas the book is words, the app is me walking you through the 63 days. And then I have lots of mini neurocycles guides where, let's say you're panicking with, if you've got a panic attack, or you're battling with overgeneralizing or overthinking, or with imposter syndrome or anxiety or something like that. So you can quickly press that, and then I actually walk you through a mini neurocycle in a few minutes, 6, 7, 8 minutes, where I take you through the 5 steps to help you manage the moment. So you can use the 5 steps to managing your day-to-day moments, and you can use them for the big stuff. So I always recommend to people to get yourself into the routine. I still do it every single day. When I'm getting ready is when I do the 5 steps. So that's when I do my neurocycle, and I'm always working on one toxic thought at a time. And when that's finished, then I start another one. And when you say one thing, remember what I said earlier on. If you think of one thought, think of a tree. A tree's got lots of roots and lots of branches. So it's got lots of memories. So one thought is the product, but it's made of lots of memories. So one thought, it could be negative thinking. That's the tree, negative thinking. But there's a whole bunch of memories associated with that. There could be thousands that will come up as you, hundreds or thousands that will come up as you're working through the 21 days. So people think, I must only think of one thing. No, one concept. And be very disciplined about the concept. If you're working on negativity or having a negative mindset, there's a reason why you have that. And there's a whole lot of memories that are going to be associated to help you work that out. So there's multiple stuff that will come up. Okay, so that's why you've got to be very organized. That's why it's cleaning up the mental mess. It's not a disorganized process. Now, the more you get into that routine, this is a lifestyle, because more messy stuff will happen in your life. More traumas will happen. No one is going to ever not have trauma. Trauma happens just by being alive. You're in life because you're at the mercy of circumstances, events, and other people. So the more you learn to manage, the more effective you become in progressing forward. So if you discipline yourself to practice the daily stuff, it automatically carries over into the day-to-day stuff. So then, like, I'm at the point now where, having developed this, and my patients for years that have been using this, and people that have now been using my system will tell you the same thing, that the more you practice the disciplined day-to-day routine, the easier it is to apply it quickly in the moment. So let's say that you are about to interview someone. You're interviewing me. So let's say just before you interviewed me, maybe you got an email from one of your employees that some disasters happened, and now you've got to manage this data with its emotions. So the information comes in, and immediately a toxic thing is built. There's the email, there's your reaction, but now I've got to go do a podcast. Now, how do I deal with this? And this is not going to influence how I function. So you could immediately do a neurocycle to literally put that in a little time capsule and just wait, I'll deal with it later. So you go through this very controlled process of getting your neurochemistry under control, getting your brain waves under control, getting your endocrine system under control. In other words, the neurocycle literally repurposes and redefines your physiology. And I mean, that's powerful in the moment, so that you don't have to solve it in that, but you've got another crisis that you have to do. Well, not crisis, but you have to go do a podcast interview. So this has got to wait for 45 minutes before you go manage that. So you don't want it to invade like a virus invades. You want it to be encapsulated so you can do this, and then you can come back to that. So you could use the neurocycle in that kind of situation. So the in the moment stuff as well, very, very powerful and effective. So I showed in my research, and you would have seen in the book, at the first part of the book, I put in one of my most recent clinical trials. So the first half of the book, I put a summary. And one of the statements I make, which you may have read, is that you can get control of these toxic issues in our life, this crazy thinking, by a factor of 81%, which is phenomenal. Let me tell you, you will feel different, just 10% more in control. So I'm saying that through the neurocycle over time, you'll be more 81% more in control. So what does that look like, for example, in my life very quickly? It's that I still will get irritated, depressed, frustrated, anxious. I own it. I'm not scared of those because I welcome any of those and changes in my behavior, changes in my perspective, changes in my body, all of that. I'm not scared of any of them because I know that they're not me being broken, they're telling me something. So I see all of those as a warning signal, and because I see them as helpful messengers and warning signals of something that's going on, it's not me that's broken, it's I'm responding to something and I've created an adverse pattern. I'm excited because, okay, it doesn't mean I can be depressed and excited at the same time. You can have those emotions coexisting. I'm excited because I see the depression not as something that controls me, but as something that is actually telling me something. That's massive. What I've just said is massive. If you can see depression as something that's telling me something about something that's going on in my life, I'm not a broken, depressed, brain diseased, neuropsychiatric disaster. I am a fantastic human being who happens to have a pattern of depression at the moment for a reason. So you can be kind to yourself and you can be gentle to yourself, and then you can tell yourself, okay, well, I'm just going to manage this process. And if it's hard, I'm going to get support from someone to help me through that. So I'll get support from loved ones. I'll go to therapy if I have to, whatever. But this is okay. Can you see the shift in perspective there? Okay? This is absolutely critical that you come in with that angle. So in other words, give yourself the permission and tell yourself it's okay to be messy. It's okay to be depressed. It's okay to be whatever emotion you're having. And in the book, I have an emotional warning signal guide. So it actually is a bunch of emotions that sometimes people can't think of words to describe the emotions. So you could open to that page, you could read the emotions and say, okay, here's a list just to help you. And once you see a list, you can think of others. There's also a little warning signal guide where you can actually rank them, where you can say, okay, this is today at day 1, this is at a 10. This is like seriously bad today. And it's all okay. Everything's okay. Everything you're owning it. It's not who you are. It's what you have become because of what you've gone through. So you're just fixing it. If you come in with that attitude, it's so comforting. And you'll see by day 21 or day 4, day 7, it drops to a 3, that kind of thing. So there's things in there to help you. Okay, so that kind of sets the scene. So our attitude coming into the neurocycle is one of being kind to yourself. I did a whole podcast on kindness. I really recommend people go to my podcast, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess. I have so much good material there for people to listen to. Being kind to yourself is vital. It's a vital component where you say to yourself, I used to put 2 chairs out for my patients and say, okay, sit in one, and the other one is also you. That's the wise mind. So you there, the messy mind, there's your wise mind. There's the 2 of you because you operate at this brilliant level of wisdom plus messiness, and both are okay. And the wise mind's there to help you through. And then you use you instead of I. You talk to yourself as though you're giving someone advice. Okay, how are you feeling today? So that's the kind of way that you philosophize through it. Then another analogy that helped my patients tremendously, which I talk about a lot, which I'm giving you all this background because otherwise people just think it's some kind of quick fix. 100%. And I don't want them to do that. Okay, then it won't work for you. Is think of being in a time capsule, a little helicopter that looks like a time capsule. Because at any one moment, you are always in the present, past, and future. You can never just be in the present. Like we're talking now, yes, we're in the present, but everything I'm telling you is stimulating memories that already exist. In other words, you're also in the past. Everything that's coming up is already in the past. Plus, you're thinking of how you can apply this in your life and personally, in your business, etc. So you're thinking of the future. So in any one moment, you're in present, past, and future. And that's how your mind works. We spend every part of our day. So even when you meditate or you just focus on just the now moment, the now moment's also informed by the past and the future. And so when we talk about the now moment, what we're really talking about is we're talking about just getting rid of all the distractions and thinking and trying to focus in on what am I actually feeling at the moment and why. So that's what it really means. So I always try to throw that in there because people think I can just cut out the rest of everything, but you can't. You never do. Your mind does not work like that. So, and that's relieving to know because a lot of people say, I can't stop thinking. Well, no, of course you can't. You never stop thinking. You think 24/7. You wake up thinking. You go to sleep thinking. You think until you're dead. Okay. So in other words, you're thinking, you go to sleep, you dream with your thinking, you eat with your thinking. Your thinking, your mind never stops. I have
Yeah.
a quote in the book where I talk about you can go 3 weeks without food, 3 days without water, 3 minutes without oxygen, but you don't even go 3 seconds without thinking. And we got to think of that. So I'm teaching you how to direct that thinking that never stops. Otherwise, it's just going to be messy. So I'm teaching you how to manage it. So the neurocycle is the skill that you want to develop to manage that process. I have therapists around the world that have got their patients on the book, on the app, and that are using it, and the patients are using it in between, because you're not going to go to therapy 24/7. You're not going to be coached or be with someone. You wake up at night, you may be alone there in your bed and your mind's going crazy. You can't just phone up your therapist. So you've got to know how to manage your own mind. So I'm trying to put tools into people's hands to manage every moment, as well as to make things like therapy and coaching, counseling, etc., and discussions with loved ones that help you more efficient.
Yes.
Okay, so that's kind of a lot of there. So now let's say that you're in your little helicopter, you're flying. What are you flying over? You're flying over your life. And what is your life? It's all the products of your mind, which are all your experiences that you've been building since you were in the womb at a certain age. So every experience is converted in the process I've said through your think, feel, choose, all this physics stuff into your brain, into the trees, the DNA, and your mind. So you flying over this forest of trees that's infinite, because those are all your trillions of experiences, and most of it's green, and some are some of these little toxic clusters, and some of them you've really ignored for long, so they're really oozing lots of smoke, to trying to get your attention. You keep flying past and not landing there, but then you decide eventually, look, I can't suppress this anymore, I've got to deal with it. You're going to land your plane. So with the neurocycle in mind, you think, okay, so I'm in my time capsule, I'm looking at this pattern in my life. I'm flying over, what is the most disruptive pattern? And you see that toxic area over there is like this oozing mass of smoke, and it's oozing. So what does that look like? Okay, so what are your patterns? What does it look like? It looks like, what are your persistent emotions? What are the emotional warning signals? So like, is it depression, anxiety, panic, fear, frustration, irritation, aggression? What are the emotions or combination of? There's never normally one. It's normally comorbidity. There's normally more than one. Then look at your behaviors. What are you doing? What's the pattern? Always look for the patterns, because what is consistent? What's chronic? What's happening that's disrupting you? That's the thing that's shouting at you to work on first. When you've worked on that, you can work on the others, because there's always something to work on. So you'll work on the tree that's oozing the most toxic smoke kind of thing, in terms of the emotions, in terms of sending out the warning signals, which are your mind, brain, and body's ways of saying, hey, wake up, Austin, pay attention. Your survival is being threatened. Then you'd look at your behaviors, then you'd look at your perspective. Very interesting, your perspective, how you're looking at life. Life sucks. I hate life. Life is terrible. Very, very, very informative. When you over COVID, people have really increased in anxiety, and we see that an increase in the size of the amygdala. The amygdala is like a library, and it holds, like a library holds books. It holds your perceptions, your perspectives of life. And so when they're very toxic, it becomes inflamed. And that's part of the reshaping that we're seeing, that then affects people's ability to process through emotions. So by the neurocycle, you can actually change the size of the amygdala. You start looking at your perspective. And when you know what your perspective is, and you're doing it in this objective, kind, accepting way, that's so important. You're not judging. It works for you. If you judge yourself and you're harsh and you think, this is terrible, I'm a suppressor, I'm bad, I don't have enough faith, I haven't done this right, I haven't said enough prayers, I haven't done enough work, I'm bad. When you do that, 1,400 neurophysiological responses will work against you.
Wow.
And not for you. So for example, you'll have less blood, your blood vessels around your heart will constrict, you'll have less blood flow and oxygen to your brain, which means that you're going to be incredibly hypertensive, and that's not at all healthy. You're setting yourself up for stroke, for cardiac issue, all kinds of stuff. And if you live like that consistently, no wonder people are dying 8 to 25 years younger from cardiac issues, because we're not managing this process. But if I am kind to myself and do everything I've been telling you, I make 1,400 neurophysiological responses work for me and not against me. So even though I haven't solved the problem, just by this shift of mindset that I'm describing, flying the helicopter, landing the plane, the 2 chairs, or everything I've been saying, and in detail in the book, in detail in the app, I set you up for this in all the work that, when I walk you through the neurocycle in both places. You are making for example, the blood vessels around your heart will dilate. So now you've got more blood flow, more oxygen to your brain. Your amygdala can function more efficiently. Your frontal lobe can function more efficiently. Your impulsivity drops. Your decision making increases. In other words, your wise mind can actually have a word. It's not going to be drowned out by the mess. It's actually going to, hey, Austin, listen to me. This is okay. This is what's going on. And you get more introspective. And as you go through the 5 steps, you increase this very compatible relationship that is actually part of your design between the mind, brain, body. And your telomeres work for you, and this works for you, and that works for you. And so as you progress through the 5 steps, you're increasing your neurophysiological response. So your brain and body are becoming healthier and more resilient, and you feel different, and you're able to have more clarity and wisdom. Because if you're working through a messy mind and body, a brain and body and mind, it's really hard to do anything. So this system is helping you step out, stand back, and clean up so that you can actually go and deconstruct. And in that state, then you can land your helicopter, which is sit in the chair and get out. It's not you alone, it's you and your wise mind, and you're surrounded by love, however you want to see that from a spiritual sense. You are not alone, you are immersed in love. Quantum physicists have shown that the gravitational fields that we are immersed in, that keep us from floating, have the properties and qualities of love. So love is pervasive. So you just grab onto that. It's the natural order that we just land the plane, messy mind, wise mind, in love, and you stand back. You don't stand under that tree. You don't let the apples fall on your head and overwhelm you. You stand back and you control the process. You increase your awareness and you start gathering. And the first step, gather awareness, like you're picking apples of those 4 signals. So the signals have drawn you in, the pattern. So now you gather them. Okay, the depression and withdrawing and life sucks and sore gut, that drew me in, landed the plane. Now I'm going to more detail, pick the apple, you control it, you gather, you increase your autonomy, your agency. That's so important. You're not controlled by this, you controlling it. And you select, today all I can handle is the depression. My perspective is this, I can only handle these 4 apples. Perfect. Then you grab those 4, then you go to reflect. You start reflecting on them. Why are they there? What do they mean? You start writing that down in the form of a metacog. A metacog is a system of writing that is unbelievably powerful. We would get people that were battling so much with schizophrenia that they couldn't cope. Just by these steps and the metacogs, going into the metacog, we could show them the different personalities and help them reconnect and see where each personality was a coping mechanism to cope with the brokenness of from the abuse. And I mean that this process got people healed. I'm not talking medication. I don't support psychotropic medication because it damages the brain. This is the power that you have within you. So the metacog is so worth learning. I have a video in the app, I have a description in the book, and that's the 3rd step, is to write in a metacog. People find that the hardest part and will give up, but don't, because that is so powerful. It pulls the sides of the brain together, 2 sides together, gets you deep into an unconscious mind, connects the wise mind with the messy mind. The 4th step is also a writing step, where you're rechecking what you've written, getting the patterns, etc., etc. And the 5th step is a little action, and that you do in 15 to 45 minutes. And then, the action, the active reach, the 5th step is to keep you anchored back in something positive, so you don't ruminate and keep going back to that. You're not going to think about that anymore today. Tomorrow you'll pick up where you left off. So all you think about today is your active reach, which is maybe something as simple as, it's okay to feel negative. There's a reason why I feel negative. There's a reason for that negativity. So in this tree, maybe it's being negative, always seeing the negative prediction. And where's that come from? If we've got negative predictive patterns, if we see, oh, this always happens to me, we've got to get you reconceptualizing to the point of, no, it's not that everyone's always breaking up with you or treating you badly. It's that you just give so much into the situation that you feel so hurt by when things don't quite go that way. See, that's a completely different angle. So you've got to start learning to reconceptualize, because everything can be reconceptualized. And that's how so that would be what you would be breaking day after day. You would be breaking a negative pattern in that way. Does that make sense? Yes, a lot. I've said a lot in a short period of time, and I've got another interview in like 3 minutes.
Okay, you're okay. No, and I think one thing that you said too is that it's I think it's biblical as well. It's like that's the true definition of taking your thoughts captive.
Yeah,
and
totally.
For the
and
people
the
listening,
mind.
and it's not going to be easy work. It's not going to be.
No, it's painful. It's worse.
Yeah, to think about your negative thoughts and everything that's going on in your brain. It's got to be horrible.
Well, it gets very hard.
I know. I think thank you so much. This was amazing. I would love to talk to you more. I could probably spend 2 hours just listening to you and asking you an abundance of questions on leadership, how leaders can do better at talking about this. I think that's a topic that we didn't get to, but I'll find you a different time. But how could people find you? What would be the best way to reach out to you? What would be the best way to read some more content on this? Because I think this is something that more people need to know about.
Absolutely. Well, they can find me on social media. Dr. Caroline Leaf is my handle. So from Instagram, I'm on all of them, all the platforms. As we know, from Instagram, you can get everywhere. So I'll take you to my website. The book's available wherever books are sold. I have a lot of books, and the Neurocycle app's available on iTunes and Google Play. My podcast, Cleaning Up Your Mental Mess, wherever you subscribe to podcasts. Just been nominated, by the way, for the British Podcast Award. So if people want to, which I'm really excited about. So if people want to know more about that, it's over there as well. So that's probably the best place, to get into the social media, podcast, get the book, get the app, and they're going to be very well equipped to manage their mental mess.
Totally. And it's a real thing, guys. I'm going to do it. I do it. I go through it. I think it's something that needs to be reached, and it's only going to make you better on the other side.
Absolutely. Well, if you don't, I always say, like, it's sort of in conclusion, I mean, if your mind's working anyway, so if you're not managing it, it's a mess, and that means your brain and body are a mess. So you may as well manage it. I mean, here's a tool to manage your mind. Doesn't mean that life's going to be a walk in the park. It just means that you are going to be 81% more effective at managing it. So I was saying that earlier on, that what's happened now is that I still get worked up and whatever, but because I'm in control, it doesn't affect 100% of my day. I'm actually 81% in control. So there's only a 20% maybe in impairment of my day or something like that. So I don't ruminate for hours. I catch it. I get under control, etc. Again, and that's what people can do. You can accept the tough stuff and accept that you don't have to try and think it's never bad things will never. They will. You will have. You will go through stuff. Life is like that. So you may as well accept that. And here's a way of managing it.
Love it. Thank you so much.
My pleasure.